Okay, I'm sitting here with Herman Hess, age 87, a decorated veteran of the Korean War, and he's going to tell a story about when he was 6 years old, living in Pennsylvania. And Herm, go ahead.
Okay. Uh, it was 1937, and my dad came to me and said, now I want you to get dressed today in your Sunday going to church clothes because we're going to go over to Gettysburg, which was 14 miles away. And I said, well, my goodness, what's going on in Gettysburg? And they said, well, Franklin Delano Roosevelt is going to dedicate a peace memorial attributed to the peace that's been involved with the Civil War. And there will be living members of the Confederate Army there and the living members of the North,
Union.
the Union members. And there is going to be a dedication of a memorial with flame flying out of the top of this tower. And so also they will issue commemorative 50-cent pieces today for the celebration of the 75th anniversary of the ending of the Civil War.
75th. Wow.
Yeah.
And then, so you were there to see, and you received one of these commemorative, and you still have it.
Mm-hmm. I still have them.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And you were 6 years old or seven?
Seven, I think. 6 or 7.
Awesome.
Well, it was 37, so I would have been 6.
What was the car that you drove down there in?
Yeah, 29 Pontiac.
29 Pontiac.
Yeah. Had an oval window in the back.
Wow. Oh my good. My goodness. Awesome. All right, so okay, I'm sitting here with Herm Hess, age 87, a decorated war veteran, and he's going to tell a story about the meaning of it's better, there's nothing better than sliced bread. So, here we go.
During the Depression, my father worked as a bakery truck driver between York County, Pennsylvania, and Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And during that period, he had, of all things to offer, sliced bread. Now, the Mennonites and the Amish in Lancaster County were strictly against anything mechanized. And they didn't want anything to have anything to do with anything that looked like it was some mechanized device that produced it. But anyways, they found reasons to accept sliced bread at 5 cents a loaf. And so my dad delivered this bread all through the Depression. And after the Depression was over, in the 40s, then he took a job as a plumber.
So much for sliced bread, huh?
Yeah.
But the Amish people bought it.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah, they didn't have any such thing.
That was sliced bread. They had to slice it. Awesome, Herm.
At that same time,
Sorry. Okay.
Russia had launched a Sputnik, this was 1957, and we had at that time our only defense system was what was called the DEW line, Defense Early Warning System, which was located up in the Arctic Circle. And it was operating on a basis of radar, and they would watch for incoming planes, and anything that was not identifiable as friendly was immediately relayed back to a place in Nebraska where they had the capability to send up, say, aircraft that could combat the incoming aircraft. And Admiral Rickover, he knew about nuclear power. And he went to Congress and he said, "You give me the money to build 10 nuclear submarines, and I'll cover 90% of Russia's mainland with missiles from submarines." But we had to go out and develop manufacturers to make the 10 submarines and the equipment. So about 100 of us went all over the U.S. qualifying manufacturing firms to provide the equipment that was needed to build the 10 nuclear subs. And so that took us a couple of years, and we finally got it done. And fortunately, nothing happened in that interim, but we ended up having the control with, mind you, these were nuclear-powered submarines which didn't have to surface to charge batteries such as the old World War II submarines did. And they could go submerged for months and then all of a sudden appear and have missiles in their conning towers to fire against the enemy.
Incredible.
Yep, that was our defense system. And it was valid enough that Russia paid attention.
But they did.
Mm-hmm.
So you were in Idaho at this time, or where were you?
In Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh, okay.
And there were about 100 of us that were flying all over the country every week, checking out manufacturers who could make safety-related equipment to fit into these nuclear subs. So all of a sudden you had to upgrade the American industry to provide equipment which would meet the criteria.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then after you qualified these people, you vetted them, and then you make a recommendation to the military.
Oh, sure.
As to which the suppliers were superior.
They were able to stay on the bidders list if they would meet the requirements that were set up.
I see.
And we were there evaluating, did they meet the requirements or didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Most of them did not. So we'd give them a list of things that they had to do to bring themselves up to the required level. Then we'd go back in due time, maybe 6 months, to see that they had implemented those features, and finally got them on a bidders list to where they could provide the equipment.
Nice.
It was a major effort.
Oh, sure. Well, next, so from there you went from that, and how did you end up in Idaho in this job?
Well, I went from Pittsburgh to Pasadena, California, on a 6-month assignment for the purpose of being able to provide equipment that went into the submarines and the nuke-powered control rod drive mechanisms for on the reactors, of which it would take. Each reactor required 19 of those control rod drive mechanisms. And what those things would do is raise and lower control rods in the reactor to either accelerate or dampen radioactivity. It was kind of like the throttle.
Throttle, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I was there for 6 years on a 6-month assignment.
In Pasadena.
Yeah.
And how old were Gregory and Vicky at that time?
Wee little.
Wee little.
Vicky was kindergarten,
Yeah.
and Greg was 3 years behind her.
3 years, okay. So going from Pasadena to Idaho, how did that transition happen?
Well, I went to Idaho because that's where we were now operating the likes of an aircraft carrier and 2 submarines. One was a Westinghouse submarine, the other was a GE submarine. And this was in the middle of the Idaho desert. And these guys would go through training and be able to operate these reactors, which were identical to what was aboard ship. And so when they left Idaho and qualified, they could step aboard ship and everything was the same.
Kind of like a simulator.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And they would be trained something like every 6 months. Your whole submarine crew would be sent off to some shipyard.
Well, how could they run the reactors in the desert? I mean, they weren't running reactors.
We had rheostats so that the propellers, or the shaft, that were normal to a submarine or an aircraft carrier. The power coming off of that went into a water rheostat and was just discharged and dumped. It was a tremendous waste of energy.
Oh.
But it was necessary to simulate what they would do aboard ship.
Okay. It was a simulator, yeah. So what was your role in this thing in Idaho?
The quality assurance,
Uh-huh.
to make sure that what they were doing were quality things. And when it's required them to do something, either I or somebody representing me would verify that they did in fact meet that requirement.
Quality control.
Mm-hmm. I was a quality control manager at Idaho, where we had 2 submarines and an aircraft carrier reactors. And we trained, I forget how many sailors, every 6 months. And they'd come there and they would operate everything in hull so that when they went back to the shipyard and stepped aboard ship, everything was the same.
They knew what to do.
Yeah.
Well, that's an awesome story.
Career.
Career and story, yeah. You got one more meatball there.
Yeah. Westinghouse was a great company to work for. Mm.
Yeah. They treated you right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they did.
Well, tell me the story about when they were cutting back, when Rickover said, you need to get your numbers down from 5,000 to, what was it,
Yeah,
3,800 or?
What was happening, the Rickover always required two major companies on major jobs so that there wasn't one who could take advantage of it. They had to be in competition.
Yeah.
Which in this case was GE and Westinghouse.
Mm-hmm.
And each had a research laboratory. And Rickover wanted them to develop a breeder reactor in which there'd be 1.02 units of new fuel developed for each unit of fuel that was expended. And so Westinghouse had the lead on it, and Rickover was following it very closely. And it got to a point, 15 years, and they weren't coming up with the final product. That pissed the admiral off.
Pissed him off.
Yeah, and he said, Westinghouse, you got 5,000 people. GE has 2,900. You're going to cut down to the same size as GE, and you're going to produce. And so Westinghouse got cut back to 2,900 people. I was one of them, and in the group I was in, I had the least seniority of anyone, and we had 17 people in my group, and we were cut back to 5, and I stayed.
Yeah. So it wasn't based on seniority, but it was based on merit. I'm thinking.
Total capability.
Sure. Yeah. I can see that. Awesome, her.
Yeah.
Awesome. So after you did the stint in Idaho, and that was all done, then what did you do? Then what did you do after
Idaho?
After Idaho?
Well, before going to Idaho, I was a resident in Southern California for Westinghouse at a major manufacturing plant. And so we were producing control rod drive mechanisms for the Nautilus submarine whenever they needed it. And so I went out there on a 6-month assignment, but I was there 6 years until we completed the second complete refurbishment of what was the original. And then I went to Idaho, and I was we had 3 reactors in which we represented what was in the Navy in the form of submarines and surface ships. And our job there was to train 1,800 sailors every 6 months so that they could go aboard ship and operate the facilities in a manner that was required for nuclear operation.
Mm-hmm. So, Herm, let me ask you this question.
What?
Going back to the beginning, when you were saying that you worked for a shoe store, right? A shoe store. I mean, you were selling shoes, and then you were selling roses, right? Roses. And then you were making hamburgers, flipping hamburgers, right? Flipping hamburgers.
Yeah, I did at
Right.
night to make up.
Okay, so do you have any regret on the decision you made to go into working for Westinghouse?
No, never.
Your life would have been simpler.
I'm very loyal to Westinghouse even today.
Oh, good.
Mm-hmm. They were a great company to work for.
Treated you right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they did.
I'm going to record it, okay? Is that okay? So let's talk about the airplanes that the Germans made, right? Germans?
Yes, there was the interview of one of our pilots came back highly decorated, and he was on a radio show, and the MC said to him, "Well, look at all your ribbons." And he said, "Can you tell me about some of your missions that you flew and so on?" He said, "Yes." He said, "We would fly," and he said, "and then we would have to get up against the Messerschmitts and the Focke-Wulf." And so he said, we would combat with them, and he said, soon we got to the point where all those Messerschmitts were coming at us, and one after another, and those Fokkers was kind of off waiting on us too. And the MC grabs the mic and he says, by Fokkers he means Focke-Wulf. And he says, no, some of them Focke-Wulfs were Messerschmitts.
It's all
Some of
German.
those Fokkers were Messerschmitts.
That sounds really... it's hard to understand, but...
Yeah.
It sounds really like bad language.
Yeah. Fokkers.
But there were German airplanes.
The Focke-Wulf was a very good German fighter.
And so was the Messerschmitt.
Yeah, ME-109.
Mm.
Yeah. Focke-Wulf, I forget what the number was, but it was a single engine fighter. And it was equivalent to our P-47 Thunderbolt.
Okay.
Yeah.
My goodness. A Fokker and a Messerschmitt. It's all...
Some of them Fokkers were Messerschmitts.
I'm going to look that up in my Funkin' Wagnall. Here we are with Herm Hess, and he's talking about his time in Korea here now.
Okay, we're on what was called the 15th replacement draft. And it's made up of Marines who would be part of the 1st Marine Division, infantry. And we left Sasebo, Yokosuka, Japan, and was heading over toward Korea. And we landed about 50 miles above the 38th parallel near a town called Wonsan. But there was no town there. It was just a a shoreline, and we came in and landed with our LCTs, went on land, and then climbed on up into the defense positions which had been set up since the fall. Now this was December I'm talking about when we went in there.
In 1951?
1951. And I got moved into what was, after we were hiking forever and ever at night, and I got moved into, just step in there, you're filling a slot. And it was a machine gun nest. And I was basically a rifleman. And so as this morning started to come by, I could see the tree stumps out in front of the front line. We were in a trench right on the front line, and looking forward toward the enemy. Tree stumps started to move because everything looked like it was going to move, but it didn't. And finally it became daylight, and then they came around and they said, "What the hell are you doing in this machine gun nest?" So I got repositioned into an area where I was now a fire team leader, and I had two rifles run and a BAR that were under me, a Browning automatic rifleman.
Oh.
And
Is that a machine gun?
it's like that. It's not quite. It's like a light machine gun, but a Browning automatic rifle, and it's heavy. And they usually take the shortest guy to carry it. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because he's a smaller target. But anyways, we moved into line on position in foxholes. And that's where we were going to be for the next 30 days, in a trench. And the only way you could get out of the 30 below zero weather was to get inside the trench, where there was a bunker that was built during the time when the ground was not frozen. And it might have been a heaped up mound of maybe 2 feet of dirt. And you were under that, in with rats. And every once in a while they'd bring by loaves of bread unwrapped and just set them inside, and the darn rats would get into them.
No cheese.
Huh?
No cheese?
No.
Cheese and bread?
Yeah.
Salami?
No, just bread. And there we stayed until we were relieved, which might be every 15 days. And go back, and sometimes it was 3 weeks.
How cold was it then?
30 below.
30 below zero.
Yeah, the only place you could go to get out of it is in your sleeping bag.
Did you have North Face Grey Goose down sleeping bags at that time?
We had a down sleeping bag with a heavy wool blanket liner on the inside of that down bag. And we did stay warm in that.
Yeah.
But we used to say the bravest man was the guy who could get up at midnight and go take a crap.
or pee, because it would probably freeze.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My God. So what was your most engaging part of dealing with the enemy in this war?
Probably we would do patrols out in front of the front lines at night and be out walking around and down over paths and so on. Every once in a while you'd come upon a body which would be maybe a North Korean or a Chinese, all frozen stiff and laying in the snow, and you eventually work your way back into your bunker area, and you had, like, in front of you, you had to go through a special area because you had double concertina wire in front of you, so that you would come in at one area and then turn right and walk quite a ways, then you could find another area where you could come in. There was never a straight path in through the barbed wire. And in that barbed wire, there would be trip flares and also trip landmines for the enemy. I mean, you knew where they were or what it looked like, so you didn't get involved in them, of course. But as the enemy would try to come up, we had what was called sound powers, and it was microphones located out into the first strand of barbed wire, and as these people would come up from the enemy side, rustling in leaves would be picked up and let us know that they were coming up, and we would call for mortar fire. And they had the mortar stakes set up in likely avenues of approach, so that when you called back and said, send out so many rounds of 60 millimeter mortars, which are anti-personnel, in locations such, that would take care of where we were hearing the noise coming from.
Wow.
So they were pretty good defense lines.
So did you ever encounter face-to-face a North Korean on the trail?
Not with certainty, although I come around the back of we were on a butte, and a back trail on the back side of the butte. I was coming around to go to where we could get to a cave where I would go in and have my C rations and sleep for the 4 hours off. And this guy came toward me. He was Oriental. I didn't know whether he was North Korean, South Korean, or Chinese. And we both looked at each other with suspicion, but never fired around.
You both had weapons.
They both had weapons.
And you just look at each other and said, all right.
We decided not to shoot each other.
Okay, well, that's awesome. I mean, oh my God. Okay, so tell me how you got your Purple Heart. Can you tell me that story?
No. We had moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, the whole 1st Marine Division, in the spring of 1952. And what we were doing was expecting the Chinese and the North Koreans to make a major push down through the Sewell Valley into Sewell. So they'd moved us off of the east coast of Korea, the whole 1st Marine Division, over to this area around Imjeon River, and also where they had the truce talks at Panmunjom. And we were to set up what was called an outpost line of resistance, and which was unfortunately, the South Korean army, in their efforts to try to make things defensible, they put out minefields with no patterns. They had no idea where they had put them. And then we came up to set up a main line of resistance for the anticipated push by the Chinese and the North Koreans. And we were right in the middle of the minefields that had not been set up to any pattern. And I was the fourth guy back from the front, and up come a bouncing Betty mine.
It was a South Korean mine.
A South Korean mine came up and exploded at about an elevation of 4.5, 5 feet. Knocked about 5 of us on our rear, and I got a wound on the left side of my head.
And that's what it blew out your ear drums.
I guess, I don't know. I think
Yeah.
that's what they said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No. My goodness.
And that was nighttime. The next morning, I mean, we didn't move anywhere. We just sat because we didn't know where the mines were, and neither did the South Koreans. But there was a guy that was already set a mine off and had his leg blown off. And the Navy corpsmen, the medics, had to get into him to try to save his life.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time you were taught the only way when you were in an area in which it was a minefield and you didn't know where the mines were placed, you had to probe everything with your bayonet. And it was taking too long. And this guy was losing lots of blood.
Oh.
And so the Navy corpsman just said to hell with it and got up and ran into him. And got him out of there, but he still died.
Wow. Incredible. Incredible story, Herm.
Leg blown off.
You saw that. Yeah, you probably think about that a lot, huh?
Oh, not much.
No, not anymore.
That was then, this is now.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Well, it's such an awesome story, Herm. Yeah. It's a treasure to know you. Mm-hmm.